Hello, you are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what is making headlines with the Financial Times Whitehall editor, Lucy Fisher, and editor of the Courier, David Clegg. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a look at what is on some of those front pages, and we'll start with The Guardian. It leads with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, saying that laws to stop the spread of misinformation are not fit for purpose when discussing the far-right demonstrations. I'm no longer safe as a Muslim, the words of the mayor from the Telegraph as he commented on those riots. The Mail mentions, to quote, tough sentences that have been handed out to people arrested for violence during the unrest. While the Express lead with the arrest of a councillor during counter-protests. The Times reports Britain's high levels of immigration are falling significantly after curbs on visas. The Eye says Chancellor Rachel Reeves has told ministers to come up with ways to make major saving cuts before her first budget. The Metro leads with the news that police have been alerted to make sure future Taylor Swift concerts are safe after 2 men were arrested in Austria over a suspected terror plot. The Financial Times now, and they lead with the story that Google and Meta struck a secret deal to target adverts to teenagers. The companies dispute the claims. And the Star touches on what they're calling a hairy situation. They say 1 in 5 men are afraid to take off their shirts at the beach due to excessive hair. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us now. As I said, tonight we're joined by Lucy Fisher and David Clegg. Lucy, David, thanks very much for giving up some of your evening to talk to us tonight. Let's get straight on with it, and we'll start with the Telegraph, Lucy. And, I mean, that's a strong quote from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, saying he feels no longer safe as a Muslim in the city.
A really powerful intervention by Sadiq Khan, who's talked about how heartbroken he is at the way his children's generation feels scared walking the streets of some of our cities, including the capital, due to the Islamophobia we've seen amid some of the protests this week. He says he doesn't feel safe. That's why he is accompanied by police protection at all times. And also, to my mind, very interesting that he takes square aim at Conservatives over their use of rhetoric in recent years, which he says has contributed to the demonisation of Muslims in this country. I
mean, it wasn't long ago, David, that he was described by some on the right as an Islamist. He spoke out against it then and now saying, you know, he felt triggered by what he'd seen in the past few days.
Yes, indeed. And if you look at some of the social media comments and social media, I would say, pillaring that he gets, I think that is understandable. And what I feel is important is that we have also seen similar comments from Humza Yousaf, the former First Minister of Scotland this week, who said he didn't feel, or he was no longer sure if his family was safe in the UK and if he could stay here. And it's interesting that these are probably the 2 most prominent Muslim politicians in the UK of recent years. They're both worried about their children and they feel now that they have to speak out and make these, which are incredibly stark remarks about this. And obviously, the Sadiq Khan has just been speaking today, but there's been the reaction in Scotland to Humza Yousaf's comments, and it was frankly pretty dismaying because from a lot of places, the response that my newspaper got when we were reporting on this was people criticising him for the comments. These are people I don't think that hold racist views, but were, I think, underestimating or dismissing his concerns as not being valid. And I think when we have a situation where now both he and the Mayor of London are saying this, that it underlines the gravity of the situation and the fact that I think we should all be listening quite carefully about what we need to do about it to fix this problem.
Yeah, let's just stay on this for a moment. I mean, it's astounding that we've reached this point now where, as we say, the leader of a party in Scotland and the Mayor of London no longer feels safe on the streets of their own country.
Really, really shocking. And I think in another sense, we've got to buckle up for the US election and the play that may have in this country from across the Atlantic, because, of course, Donald Trump and Sadiq Khan have also been locked in a war of words for years now. And Donald Trump also making very derogatory comments about Sadiq Khan's faith. So I expect that's something we could also see flare up before November the 5th.
Let's move on to the front of The Guardian then now, if we can. And it's another quote from a conversation that Sadiq Khan must have had earlier on today. And this talks about the laws around fake news, David. Of course, we must remember that these riots began because of misinformation that had whipped people up to then go and attack mosques after those stabbings in Stockport.
Yes, indeed. And I think that the social media climate, the misinformation and disinformation is on there. The fact that they are entirely unregulated, essentially, and that there has been, I think, for too long an attitude of almost that this is not possible to regulate this, that this is just a Wild West, and that is the reality with which we are faced, and there's nothing to be done about it. That can no longer continue. It cannot be allowed to continue. And what Sadiq Khan is saying here is that the attempts that we have seen at Westminster recently to take what are really initial baby steps about this are nowhere near serious enough. I think that is even underplaying the situation, to be honest. We are in a position this week where Elon Musk, who owns one of the biggest social media platforms, who's one of the richest men in the world, he himself was promoting fake news today. His attitude has been unbelievable in the last few days. His cavalier, irresponsible attitude to something of which he knows nothing has been astonishing to me. And it really is getting to the place where we have such hand-wringing conversations about the print media in particular in this country, and yet we have this unregulated area where anything goes, where we have now seen explicitly violence on the streets because of it. And we are getting to a position where something very dramatic needs to be done from a legislative perspective. My fear, though, is that, as I think we've seen in recent years, it is MPs, or certainly the previous Parliament, was not equipped to deal with this because, frankly, the MPs didn't understand the issue, or not enough of the MPs understood the issue. And I'm not pretending that I have an answer for this, because clearly it is a very complicated issue. But it is also certainly the case that if we don't think very carefully about how we respond to this, we are going to find ourselves as a country in a position where social media conglomerates based in other countries are not only undermining the robustness of our elections, but are also undermining the very safety of our streets and communities. And that is not a situation that is acceptable.
Lucy, what's your sense of this? Because, of course, the Online Safety Act
hasn't come in yet.
It hasn't started yet. We're talking now about reviewing it at this point. That's what Mayor Khan is suggesting. But as David rightly points out, a lot of the issues that we know have come from this and that now need to be reviewed are issues we've known about for years. It's about the politicians, I guess, legislators not getting ahead of it. We're out over our skis on this, some stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, in some ways, I think it's quite difficult to judge what effect the Online Safety Act will have when it comes in. It's still months away, and that's because after becoming law, it needs time for Ofcom to engage with stakeholders before it takes effect. That suggests that if they do broaden the scope or deepen it, toughen up some of the measures, which Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has suggested she is interested in looking at, that could yet be some way into the distance. That would need more legislation, more time through Parliament, and then again, this consultative process. So I think they need to look at potentially expediting that. I've also been interested in two other areas we've seen come to the fore in the past week. One is posts that meet the threshold for criminality, which are being taken down, but far too slowly. It seems to my mind it is having an effect when they're taken down. A lot of interest in last night why the riots or unrest expected in up to 100 locations never materialised. That could well be because finally yesterday we started to see some of the big posts, some of the big groups on the far right finally removed, shut down on the Telegram app, which has been one of the main apps used for kind of organising the logistics. And the second issue is these social media companies not enforcing their own terms and conditions. You know, many of them have their own rules for users, which say you are not allowed to incite hatred against people on the basis of their race or religion, but they are not enforcing that. So again, I think potentially the government needs to look at ways to ensure that they have moderators or enough resources so they are enforcing their rules.
Just one other point I would make very quickly is I think that something else that needs to happen is education. This social media revolution has really taken place in the last 10 years, and it's quite clear that there is a lot of reasonably intelligent adults that are not equipped to deal with the responsibility of being able to publish something themselves. We've seen the result of that in some of the events of the last week, and we've now got to the situation where there's been an arrest today for someone for that very reason. And I think we need to think quite deeply as well about how we educate in schools now about what the risks of social media are, but also the responsibilities of using it, which is something that we don't talk about quite so much.
I do wonder if the teaching of critical thinking is on many curriculums. And just on the sort of the fake news and the social media firms, I was speaking to an expert about it this week. He did tell me that they have the AI that can scan the messages as they're coming out. So they have the space. I mean, it's not about moderators. The technology is there. It's about them implementing it. All right, 2 more stories before we go to break, and let's crack through them as quickly as we can. Let's go to your paper, please, if we can. And I have read this story, actually, and I found it fascinating. This is about ads being targeted at teenagers, again, against their terms and conditions. But also, what fascinates me is that there seems to be something of a cover-up about it.
Yeah, a really interesting scoop from several of my colleagues in the FT here about how Google and Meta made a secret deal to target adverts for Instagram to teenagers on YouTube, skirting their own rules about not trying to target people aged under 18. And of course, in some ways, clearly they thought that this was, the perfect kind of marriage, Google wanting to maximise its ad revenues, and on the other hand, Meta, which of course owns Instagram, feeling the pressure from other rival apps which seem popular with young people like TikTok and others, and wanting to make sure that Instagram still seems cool and relevant to young people. But really interesting to uncover this. And it does make you wonder what else goes on behind the scenes between some of these massive tech giants that are coming under increasing scrutiny for sometimes monopolistic practices as well. Indeed.
David, I'm going to get you to comment on that. I will skip us on, if you don't mind, to that story on the front of the Mail as well, because I think that has been a fascinating development in the past few days. This is specifically back to the rioting and thuggery that we've seen on the streets, described by Sakir Starmer, and this is having the sentencing screens live on television.
Yes, which is a very unusual step, and we've only really seen in the past for the most serious of crimes. And I think that not only is an acknowledgement of the seriousness of the situation that we find ourselves in as a country this week, I think it's fair to say that the crimes that were being brought upon there were maybe not as serious, or we're not going to incur the kind of jail sentence that some of the other crimes that may have been televised in the past would have done. But I think what has also been very impressive in the last few days is the speed at which the justice system has dealt with this. I think we've seen more than a dozen sentences go through the courts today. It's been extremely fast, and justice is being seen to be done, which I think is very important here, because having looked at some of the scenes that we saw in recent days, there almost seemed to be some kind of ignorance towards the fact of what consequences were going to await people that were behaving in this way. And clearly a hard reckoning is coming down to a lot of them, and it is important that that is publicised properly, or as the Mail has put it in its own memorable style today, they're shamed on TV.
Yeah, there is reporting of people crying in the dock and calling for their mothers when these sentences have been handed down. All right, look, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. David, Lucy, thanks for that for now. But of course, there'll be plenty more to come on the morning's newspapers, including this from the Metro. After 3 Taylor Swift concerts in Austria were cancelled following an alleged terror plot. Stay with us.
At the moment, I'm in the Lake District, doing the first time it's been done. So I'm swimming all 11 of the lakes that you can swim in the Lake District, swimming them all back to back, and running in between with Buddy, kind of as training, swim training, ready for Limitless expedition, which starts in 6 or 7 weeks. For day one, which is swimming the channel. So I thought coming to do this record and swimming all the lakes would be great training for day one of Limitless, which is swimming across the English Channel. It's an amazing non-profit called SavSim, based out of London. So they work with London Zoo, Whipsnade Zoo. And they're 2 tiers. So they've made a mental health course using animals and nature to treat anyone with PTSD, and service people, police, anyone that can apply. But also, as well as that, they utilise the skills of these veterans by sending them to anti-poaching and wildlife conservation projects around the world. So it's kind of an amazing double course for myself as a big animal lover. You know, there's lots of things that worry us and excite us, like the channel, for example, and obviously the end with Everest, because there's some things that aren't in my control. You know, for example, the day one, the channel, and at the end, climbing Everest. It's both of these things aren't in my control as much. So that's the only kind of real nervousness I have about that. And it's also, just getting to day one, really. It's because we've still got a way to go. I cycled across the United States last year. I climbed a very big Amadablan near Mount Everest in November in preparation for Everest. Swimming, as I say, just this, for example, training camps, just training for each individual element to make sure that we stand the best chance, basically. I just have a great team around me now who can help me prepare. You know, I was doing this on my own. But now, luckily, I have a great team around me. So, like producers and the cameraman, who's going to be Molly at Blue Door Productions, and Stan Gaskell, who was the editor for The Hardest Geezer and has run across Africa. So they're now helping me support me across to Everest. So up until that point, I'm going to have support, you know, in the build-up, which is the most important thing, to have people there to help feed me to get there, because one of the most important things is being healthy weight and eating enough during 6 months of cycling and running and hiking across the world to then be in a fit state to be able to climb Everest in the longest climb in history. So that's the main thing.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with us, Lucy Fisher and David Clegg. Guys, let's get straight on with this. And David, a story that we're sort of breaking throughout the day here about these concerts, Taylor Swift concerts in Austria, having to be cancelled because of a terror plot.
Yeah, and an anxiety-induced development that all the Vienna concerts in this massive Taylor Swift tour, which has already, of course, had some dates in the UK, they've all had to be cancelled because of this terror plot in Austria. It's obviously the case that there's several dates planned for London, I think, starting a week today. And the Metropolitan Police are saying, as of tonight, that there's nothing to indicate that there's any intelligence of particular concern around those concerts here. But given what we've seen in Austria in the last few days, given the Taylor Swift connection to the tragic events in Southport, I think there will have to be a very visible presence of security around those gigs, that people who are particularly sending their children to these concerts will want to know that every precaution is being taken, that their kids are going to be safe at the concerts. And I think that sounds like a real tragedy is being averted in Austria. Yeah. So that is some relief. And the concerts, you say, in the UK, coming up in a week or so's time, set to go ahead, but that is for now, I guess. I guess they'll be reviewing the information that they're getting. Right, let's move on to another story now, and this is on the front of the
And this is about Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the cuts that are going to be needed, Lucy, to try and balance the budget ahead of the budget in the autumn.
Yeah, we know the budget's coming on October the 30th. Rachel Reeves stealing a march in asking departments to look at where savings can be made. And of course, just before Parliament broke up and MPs went home, there was a lot made of tax rises coming, and she really lent into that, didn't she, in that podcast appearance. Now everyone's wondering where those are going to come. The flip side of that is that potentially isn't enough to balance the books, and cuts will also be needed. On top of that, striking in the past few days, she hasn't ruled out fiddling with her own fiscal rules that might allow her to borrow a bit more as well. But it really does just shine a spotlight on how tight the public finances are right now.
It really does. All right, David, Lucy, thanks both for that. More from you in the next hour of the programme, of course. All right, but for now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. And the next few days will bring showers, but the heat will build in the south over the weekend. It's going to turn hot on Sunday. Most places are going to have a fine start for Friday, apart from a few showers, but southeast England is going to be dull and damp. It's going to be warm and humid in the south as well. The southeast will soon dry up through the morning, with sunshine breaking through widely. Elsewhere, it'll stay mainly dry with sunny spells, but there will be a scattering of showers around, mainly in the blustery north. Temperatures will be around average, perhaps a little above average in the south. The afternoon will bring little change, but Ireland will see cloud increasing with rain in the southwest by evening. OK, well, that was at Sky News at 10. Coming up at Sky News at 11, more people jailed and now almost 500 arrests over violent disorder on the streets of England and Northern Ireland. More in the next hour of the programme.